Hello and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. Today I'm going to be teaching you about conducting. It's a lot of fun to do, but it's also a lot of hard work. A conductor has to do an awful lot of studying and researching and just knowing a lot about music and what every person in an orchestra is going to do so that he can conduct them properly, because it's not just a case of a guy standing there or a gal standing there moving their hand to the beat. Sometimes that may be what it looks like to people, but a good conductor goes into all kinds of things, cueing people in, showing them what the dynamics should be, raising them when they need to be louder, softening them when they need to be softening, cue them in if they're starting to play a special part by themselves or a group of them are playing a special part that others don't play, and also cutting them off when they need to be cut off. There's an awful lot to it, so I think what I want to do today is just show you some of the things about conducting to give you a really good overview of what it's like. First of all, just think in terms of how many instruments are in an orchestra. And I'm thinking about a full orchestra, and I'm going to read off to you, and I have my notes here so I won't make any omissions. I want to tell you what all the instruments are in an orchestra, or can be. Now, there are some orchestras that don't have all of these instruments, but a lot of them have a great deal of them. So this is like, for example, the woodwinds. For woodwinds, you have the saxophones, and there are different kinds of saxophones. You get the E-flat alto, the B-flat tenor, you know, the basses, the sopranos, and so forth. So you get the saxophones, the clarinets, oboes, bassoons, flutes, sometimes the piccolos, and then for brass you've got trumpets, cornets, trombones, French horns, and sousaphones, and there's probably more than that, but that's a good range for instruments for brass. For the strings you have violins, violas, bass viols, which sometimes we call slap basses, but it's the same thing, guitars, lutes, ukuleles. And for percussion, you've got snare drum, parade drum, bass drums, kettle drums, which, by the way, can be tuned to play notes, not a lot of notes, but some, cymbals, xylophones, glockenspiel, and all kinds of other instruments like little bells that tinkle and things like that. Then you could have pianos, harpsichords, and harps. And then, of course, if you have singers, then you've got sopranos, altos, tenor, basses. You also have contraltos and some other people who sing in different ranges. So a typical orchestra is going to have at least the violins, clarinets, oboes, bassoons, and flutes. The brasses are going to be at least the trumpets, trombones, and French horns, and occasional sousaphone. The strings, you're always going to have violas, violins, and maybe the bass viol, sometimes others. Percussion, you're always going to have the different types of drums, including the kettle drums. Cymbals are always there. And so, you know, you have a lot of instruments. Now, a conductor has to know what all of these instruments are doing. If you have a dance band, you may not have violins. You may have a range of saxophones instead. If you have a concert orchestra, then you're probably going to have a lot of violins, but maybe not saxophones. So it varies a little depending upon whether you're dealing with just a little group that's playing by itself, or whether it's going to be a major orchestra with a lot of instruments, or whether it's going to be a dance band, or whether it's going to be a jazz band. I mean, there are differences in the types of bands, which I don't want to go into here because my focus is going to be on the conducting. But a conductor has to know everything that's going on with every instrument. Now, this is a conductor's baton. This is mine. It's not terribly big, but it is really sufficient. And they're made different sizes, a little different styles, and conductors usually have several, and they have their favorites. Now, you find in a conductor's baton, there's always a point, and it's always white. Why? Because it can be seen. If you conduct with your hands, the orchestra can see you. If you conduct with a pointer that's white, it's a lot more easy for them to see what you're doing, and it's also flexible enough so you can make a point, or you can do a staccato, and so there's a lot of things that you can do. And of course it also has a handle. It may be wood, it may be hard rubber, it might be plastic, whatever it is. The conductors will get very expensive ones. This wasn't so expensive, but it certainly is enough for my needs. So this is what they are. And you have to hold it in such a way that's comfortable enough so that you can move your wrist around and move your hand around, and loose enough so that you have flexibility in it, but not so tight. I mean, loose enough, but not loose enough to lose it, because we have had incidences, I've seen incidences where a conductor will lose the baton and it'll go flying up in the air. In one incident, which I thought was pretty funny, but at any rate, it probably wasn't for the conductor, he did an upsweep sweep on the baton, and the baton flew up and actually hit a chandelier and broke the chandelier, and everything was like pieces of glass falling down. I mean, it wasn't very nice, but so things like that do happen. So it has to be loose enough so you have the flexibility that you need, but not too loose, and it has to be tight enough so you're going to keep a grip on it, but not so tight that it loses its flexibility because you're gripping it too tight, which also is not good for your hands. So this is the conductor's baton, and everyone uses one that conducts, although you really can conduct with almost everything. Now, the conductor has to keep an orchestra together. He or she has to be able to start everybody out at the same time and end everything at the same time. And he has to know exactly what parts are playing when, and he has to know how to cue people in. Now, it's called cueing, C-U-E. You cue people in when they haven't been playing or singing, and now it's their turn to do so, say in some kind of a concert piece, and you motion them in, or you may point to them, but there are ways of doing that. If you want a person or a group of people to kind of be softer, you can use motions for that. If you want them to be louder, you use motions for that. The right hand is going to do the beat presentation, whatever the beat is, whether it's 4/4, 6/8, or whatever time it is, and the left hand is going to be signaling them as to when to come in, when to soften, when to cut off, and cueing them and so forth. So, you know, it's a little bit like tapping your stomach and rubbing your hand on your head. There's a lot of motions going on at the same time, but they all mean something. A good conductor is really a gift, because you need to watch them carefully, and you can do an awful lot, and the music stays together as it should. Some conductors that may not be so trained and may not be so good, it's kind of a guess sometimes what they want. But a good conductor will, without too much embellishment, tell you exactly what he wants just by the motion. And they'll look at you. All right, your turn to come in. Your turn to soften, you know, and they can do that easily if they know how to do it right. So the conductor has to know exactly what to do to get people to play together, and when they're supposed to play and when they're not. And it's up to the musicians, who, by the way, already know the music because they've been rehearsing it, but still they have to watch the conductor, because he may make some subtle changes. He may decide he wants a passage to go faster than it was when they rehearsed it, or slower than it was when they rehearsed it. There's another thing to consider here, too. When you get people, a group of people in a concert hall, you have the musicians on stage, you have the conductor standing in front of them, and by the way, he's standing on a podium so he can be seen, because it's critical that the orchestra, every member of the orchestra needs to see the conductor and know exactly what he's doing and why. They know the music, but they're not going to stay together exactly unless they're kind of directed to do so by following a specific beat. We will get get into the beat patterns a little later. They're very interesting. So he's not just waving his hands around. There is a special beat pattern for every time, like 4/4, 3/4, 2/4, 6/8, and so forth. So the people in the orchestra have to really watch the conductor and know exactly what he wants. As I started to say, if you have a group of people in a concert hall, they absorb sound. And so when the orchestra is playing, it may not sound near as loud as it did when they rehearsed. The other thing is you have echoes sometimes of the room that they're in, that they're playing in. Some rooms have really good acoustics. Some concert halls have lousy acoustics, and so therefore you have to be aware of echoes. I can remember when I was playing in a group of recording. It was a rehearsal for a concert, and I was involved in the rehearsal, and we split up. This is an all-recorder concert. By the way, the recorder is not a toy. It's an actual instrument, and we do play some very sophisticated music with them, very complicated music. So in this particular presentation, this was at a seminar, a group of us went up on a balcony to play, and the rest of us stayed down on the floor to play. And we were playing the same songs, but what we noticed, and this is what we were checking for, the fraction of a second it takes for the people on the floor to hear what's being played in the balcony, or vice versa. There's just a little bit of time, a fraction of a second, where one person doesn't hear it because the sound hasn't traveled that far. We weren't that far away from each other. We could see the people on the balcony. We could see the people on the floor. So it wasn't like we were very, very far away from each other. But we actually could almost time the time it took for a sound to get from the balcony to the floor, or from the floor to the balcony. So you have echoes, you have people absorbing sound as they do, which means that the sound may not be the same as it was in rehearsal, because when you were rehearsing, you didn't have the audience there. That makes all the difference in the world as to the volume of the sound. Now, a conductor, some of them, are going to be wearing earpieces, and they're going to be able to hear what other people are hearing in the audience because of the way the microphones are set up. The orchestra doesn't necessarily hear exactly what the conductor's hearing, because they're hearing it from the point of view that they're playing, so their instrument is going to be the loudest because they're playing it and it's right beside them, and the other instruments aren't going to be quite as loud. So it is a trick to balance everything out, so the orchestra plays exactly as it's supposed to, and of course the same thing is true for singers. Everything has to be balanced out. You've got your sopranos, you've got your altos, you've got your tenors, you've got your basses, contraltos. There are other singers somehow in the mix. And even in the sopranos, you have the high sopranos, the sopranos that are a little bit lower in pitch, and the sopranos that are lower than that. So there are even 3 types of sopranos. So, and that's the way it is. You know, if you're playing violin, not all violins are going to be playing the same kind of music or the same kind of parts. You've got the first violin, the second violin, the third violin. They're all playing something different. You know, you may have like 8 violins in an orchestra. That's not unusual because there are a lot of violins in orchestras. They're not that loud. You may have 3 people playing the solo parts. They're going to be first violins. Then you have a second violin part. Then you have a third violin part. Well, think of what the conductor has to do to make sense of all of this. And yet you have to do it, because if you don't, the music is not going to be that good. So it is quite a thing that you have to be able to learn, to be able to conduct. Now, I'm going to show you a score. This is a score. A conductor has a score. The score is it looks like a book. This is Handel's Messiah. It's not a full score, but it has a lot in it. And I'm going to open it up, and then I'm going to show you some individual pages. That looks complicated, doesn't it? There are 52 songs in the Messiah, And the Alleluia chorus is like the 44th song. And I've got, if we can focus on this a little bit on this chart, okay, and this is good. This is a perfect representation of this chart. It's got 11 pages on it. And I used to sing this every year, and 11 pages on it. And so each page only has 3 lines. You can see that much. Only has 3 lines. How come? Because all of the parts are represented, and each part has a line on its own. So on something like this, and I'm going to switch now, and I'm going to show you. Some of these. I've made copies. I think what I'll do is I'll move the stand a little bit. Okay, this comes from Handel's Messiah. I want to get this right. This is one of the pages, okay? And this is number 21. His yoke is easy, his burden is light. It's one of the songs in the Messiah. And you will notice that there's going to be 3, let me take a look, so make sure I do this right. There's going to be 3 or 4 singing parts, and then there's going to be a piano part. You know what, I think I'm going to put this on this, see if we can pick this up. All right. I don't know if we can do that or not. Whoops, not if it falls. Thank you, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. I think I'm going to have to hold it, I'm going to lose it. But you can see, and it's better for me to point it out, this right here is a piano part. It's got a treble clef, it's got a bass clef. And there's a little, you may have trouble seeing it, but there's a little bracket that connects the 2 of them. So what does that mean? It means that they're played together. Then what's all of this up here? These are all the singing parts. This particular score, it's called a Schirmer score. It's used a lot. And for the Schirmer score, it has 4 singing parts and a piano part which consists of a treble and a bass. So therefore, every page can only do 3 lines of music because there are so many parts involved that they can't get any more than 3 lines of music on this particular page. Same with the others. So all of this is like that too. All of the scores that I've shown you on this large poster is like that too. So you have a piano part. If I go down here, this is the piano part, the soprano and the bass. So you have a soprano part, or actually a melody part, then you have the bass part. This is true of all piano music, and there'll be like a little bracket or something holding it all together, and then all of these are singing parts. You'll notice in this particular one that not everybody's singing. These are all rests here. But these are singing, so some of the people are singing their parts and other people are not. So what does a conductor do? He has to cut off the people that are not singing to remind them that they're not singing and cue in those that are singing. And then the orchestra would be playing, or if you have a rehearsal, the piano would be playing. Now I want to mention this because if you go to a rehearsal, and I used to do this every year, if you go to a rehearsal, I'm thinking I can show this too. This would be maybe a good one. You have rehearsals where the orchestra is not present, but you are rehearsing nonetheless. Take a look at this. Soprano, 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 bass, bass clef. These are the soprano, soprano, so there are 3 soprano parts here, and there's 1 bass part, and then the piano part is below it with both treble and bass. And if you're singing it, you're using the book. Now, I took my book and I had it spiral bound. I have several of these books. I brought in one as you would buy it, just, you know, what it would be like if you bought it. But I took one of mine and I took it to a place that works with paper, and I had them do it spiral bound. It's a lot easier to open a book and have it spiral bound so it's right there in front of you than to pick up a book and you have to be constantly working with the fact that it really kind of wants to close up on you. A spiral bound is better. But you can see how complicated this music is. And if I can just do this maybe once again. Singing parts, piano. Singing parts, piano. Okay? And it's the same on the bottom, although you may not be able to get all of that. Yeah, I can see you did. Singing parts and piano. Now, the whole book is like that. You know, we have 52 songs, and it's like that. Now, not only does now this is what the singers, because I was singing soprano parts, this is a score for people who are the singers. So you get the piano part, so you know what the music is from the piano part, because if you're rehearsing, you're not always rehearsing with a conductor. You are rehearsing with other people that are also singing, and they have a piano part to the whole Messiah, so it can be played, the basic melody with chords can be played on the piano, so you know what the orchestra is going to sound like when you actually get to rehearse it with a full orchestra, but you know it's going to be much more complicated, and it's going to be much deeper if you have a full orchestra there, but at least you get the melody and the timing and the words and all of that. So someone will direct you in a rehearsal and you'll be singing, someone will be playing the piano. Now, but in addition to this, the conductor, when he finally does it, is going to have to concern himself with the orchestra. Handel's Messiah has an orchestra. It's not a big one, but it has an orchestra. It has all your singing parts. There's a lot of singing parts. And then it has other instruments such as trumpets, cornets, harpsichords, a harp, bass viols, violins, and I think French horns. You know, that's not a huge, you may have one harpsichord, you may have one French horn, you may have two trumpets, or a trumpet and a cornet. You don't have flutes in the Messiah. There's no flute parts. There's no saxophone parts. I don't think there are any clarinet parts. But all of these parts that you have, the conductor's got to know what they're doing in addition to the singing parts, in addition to everything else that's going on, and what the drums are doing, because there are drums involved, what the bass viol is doing, because that's also involved. There's a bass viol in the orchestra. Even if it's just one, it's still a separate part. You know, if you have a large orchestra, you may have 5 violinists playing the second violin part. If you have a small orchestra, you still have a violinist playing the second part, first part, third part. Some go to fourth and fifth, but not many. And so you've got all of that. You've got to know everything that's going on. So conducting is much more complicated than some guy sitting there, you know, putting their hands to the beat of the music. I've seen conductors do that, but they really need to do much better than that. Now, orchestras have sectional rehearsals and full rehearsals. A sectional rehearsal is when a group of musicians will get together and they'll play, like maybe a rehearsal is just for the woodwinds, or maybe a rehearsal is just for the flutes, or just the violins. They're rehearsing as a group for instruments that are like themselves, but they're not rehearsing with a full orchestra. And those people, when they have sectional rehearsals, will have somebody leading them, but it may not be the conductor that's going to conduct in the full concerts, because he'd be conducting all day and he couldn't even make all the rehearsals. So when I was singing in the Messiah, and I did it for several years, I was singing soprano, we rehearsed all day in sectional rehearsals. I rehearsed with all of the sopranos. Other people rehearsed, if they were alto, with all of the altos. The orchestra rehearsed by itself. You know, all people were, they broke up into the groups that they were in and rehearsed with a leader. And then later on, they got together with the full orchestra and everybody rehearsed together as a full orchestra, which means they already knew their parts. And then, of course, you have the soloists. They have to come in and rehearse too. So you can see this gets to be kind of complicated, but it's actually makes the music very nice. You just have a lot of things to consider. Now, the conductor, sometimes when he comes in, I only have 2 minutes left, but I'm going to have to continue it next time. But just the conductor will come in, sometimes tap the music stand, gets everybody together, and then raises his hands, and that's preparatory to the first beat. Then if there's an introduction, I'll have to get into that next time, play the introduction on an upbeat and then the main music on the downbeat. So you've got the upbeat, you've got the downbeat, then you've got the beat patterns. But we'll do all of this next time because I don't have time to finish it today, so we'll just continue with it. So I hope you'll join me next time so you'll get a really good idea of what the conductor is like and what they do and why they do it. It's really quite fascinating. So please join me next time.